Hello and welcome to the Joe's Art History Podcast, a podcast which celebrates all things art historical every single day. Welcome back. I am your host, Joe McLaughlin, and I'm very, very excited to bring to you this week a brilliant episode with Verity Babbs, who is going to treat us all to an in-depth dive into the works of the prolific street artist Banksy. Verity Babbs is an art historian, broadcaster and writer, and has a love of Banksy's art, and it's very, very evident throughout this conversation just how much Verity admires Banksy's outpour and the messages at the core of what he does. For those of you who may not know, Banksy is a prolific street artist, but let's be honest, he is a total enigma. Banksy in recent years has rewritten the rules for street artists all over the world, and Verity talks us through 5 of the artist's most iconic works, not only pointing out their importance within the history of art, but the powerful messages within each of the pieces. Banksy is an artist banging the drum for social change, art for all, and more importantly, sticking his middle finger up to those deserving of being brought down a peg or two. And let's be honest, we all know a few of them. In this episode, we talk boats, theme parks, and shopping trolleys in Monet's famous Lilly pond. It's a brilliant episode. We learned so much about Banksy. It's a great chat, so all that's left to do is sit back and relax as Verity and I discuss Banksy. Quick word of warning before we continue. This episode was recorded during lockdown, and as such, the audio on my side of things is a little sort of in and out in places. Verity sounds fantastic, absolutely nothing wrong with her audio, which is really who you're here for. But it, on occasion, mine sounds a little bit, just not up to the standard that I would hope that it would be, but it still doesn't distract from a really great conversation, and I hope you enjoy. Can you remember the first time you came across Banksy?
It makes me sound so old, being like back in my childhood. I'm trying to think. I mean, when I was like a young teen and doing like art in school or whatever, I think it was a sort of edgy thing for me to be like, all art is rubbish up until Banksy, who's like the actual genius and he's blown everything apart and this kind of thing. So I can't remember where I first encountered it, but I remember, I can't remember exactly what year it was, but when Exit Through the Gift Shop came out, and I remember watching that and just feeling like this is a big deal. You know, even though
what's Exit Through the Gift Shop? I have no idea what that is.
Okay, so Exit Through the Gift Shop is a film made by Banksy about Mr. Brainwash. So basically, in summary, and spoilers, obviously, I think you can do spoilers about films that are over 10 years old. I think if you haven't seen it by now and it's been spoiled for you, then like that's on you. The guy who eventually ends up being the artist, Mr. Brainwash, he starts making a documentary about street art, and Banksy's included in that documentary, but everything sort of falls apart, and Banksy sort of ends up making a documentary about him instead, and it's all about modern street art culture in the US and in France and in the UK, and it's got this amazing soundtrack, and I guess it's very kind of tied to skater culture and all this kind of thing. And when I can't really think of what the date was. I'm actually going to look it up. But that felt pretty important to me at the time, and I really loved his work. And then in 2015, when he did Dismaland, and I went and saw that was, again, I think it was a pretty formative experience.
I have visions of you as this sort of like Avril Lavigne loving sort of skater boy teenager here, with you saying about your love of street art. Is that kind of where it came from? Where did your interest in Banksy sort of start? Is street art sort of your bag, if you will? Or
yeah, I think that's interesting. I feel like I really wanted to be like the Avril Lavigne-esque and know how to skateboard, and I definitely had a phase for sure. Yeah, I think with street art, I mean, also I grew up in the middle of the countryside, so it wasn't something that I was really faced with ever. I remember when I was 16, 17, I was doing an extended project qualification for sixth form, and we had to pick a topic and you write an essay about it, and it's sort of the equivalent of an A level. And you're meant to pick something that interests you. And I was like, oh, well, what do I like? And for some reason, the thing I picked was like, okay, I'm going to do it about castles. I'm going to pick
Nice.
something about castles. So I went to a castle. I went to Kenilworth Castle in Northamptonshire, where I'm from. And I was going around to be like, okay, what do I find interesting enough to write a big essay on? And what I found there was that people had like etched their name into the bricks of this castle since like the 17th century and stuff like that. And I love the idea that people have always done that kind of thing. So, Roman graffiti and that kind of thing. And then from there, it moved into thinking, oh, maybe I'll do it about street art. And I went on a street art tour in Shoreditch, which was sort of first time I'd ever been to London on my own, and it felt very grown up and very cool. And we went to Brick Lane and I bought a coat, and like it sort of felt like street art.
All boxes ticked.
Exactly. It sort of felt like street art, and that interest in street art sort of gave me quite a few formative experiences in terms of like me being a cool young adult who does this kind of thing. Whereas actually I'm just a nerd who likes castles.
Fair enough. I mean, like I'm firmly there with you. I love a good castle bit. So for people that are listening at home and haven't heard of Banksy, like who is Banksy and what do we know about him as an artist? Because he's very much contemporary and still making.
So Banksy, Banksy's whole shtick is that he's anonymous, right? And over the years, people have tried to guess who he is. Last year, people thought he might be Neil Buchanan from Art Attack, which I think is brilliant. And
it's just amazing.
I just really want him to be Neil Buchanan from Art Attack. But no, so his whole thing is being anonymous, and obviously with street art culture, like, I guess you can be fined for it and that kind of thing. So I guess that's helpful. But what we do know about Banksy is that he is from Bristol, and in the 90s he is like involved in the music scene there. He's involved in the football scene in Bristol. We know that he was expelled from school, gets involved in petty crime, things like that. And since starting doing street art, he's basically gone on to do sort of bigger and bigger pranks. Well, I guess I'll call them pranks. And that's not just in terms of like what he's putting on walls, but he did an exhibition in the USA where he painted an elephant bright pink and everyone kicked off. And obviously he had the piece that self-shredded in Christie's. So kind of moving on to bigger and bigger things each time. And I guess that's what he's known for. Everyone's sort of watching out for what Banksy's going to do next. And the question is whether he's done everything now.
Well, that's it. And like you said, like he's always kind of looking to sort of almost sort of level up himself and his own, kind of outdo his last sort of big thing. And to be honest, when Dismaland happened, I thought he can't really ever do anything bigger than that. But there's something we're going to go on to talk about a little bit later in the podcast, which I think completely trumps Dismaland and is just an incredible thing. But before that, when we started talking about the sort of artworks we can talk about Banksy, and he's very much associated with street art, but one of the images that you have sent me, which is really interesting, is actually a painting by Banksy called Show Me the Monet. So can you just explain to people at home what this is and what the whole concept behind, because it was a series of paintings, was it not?
Yeah, so Show Me the Monet is famously the most expensive, or was at the time the most expensive thing sold as a Banksy at auction. So it sold for £7.5 million. And I'm not sure whether it was involved in this show, but certainly a lot of Banksy's shows are called things like I can't believe you morons actually buy this shit and stuff like that. And I think that, I love it when Banksy goes for a lot of money, because I know people find it controversial and they're like, well, is he a sellout because he used to make street art and now he's selling stuff for loads of money? But I think he gets that it's a joke, right? Like, I think he's kind of in on the joke of the financial side of art. Like, he knows that the people who are buying his work are, I think when he said about Show Me the Monet, is that actually the kind of people who are most damaging to society are exactly the kind of people who buy my art and just like put it in a vault for years. But yeah, Show Me the Monet sold at auction. And I think it's a brilliant piece. And one of the things that people ask a lot about Banksy is, and something that we can't ever prove, is like, did he paint it? This kind of thing. He recently did, the picture with the House of Commons, but it's all full of monkeys. A lot of people were like,
Yes.
that's too good a painting. Banksy probably didn't do it. And then there was a question of whether this other guy did it. And I sort of don't care. It's interesting. I sort of the idea of authenticity with Banksy is something I sort of don't care about. I just love it. Like, I think he has the right attitude when it comes to the art world, in terms of like, he sees right through it. And show me the Monet with these shopping trolleys sinking underneath the bridge where Monet famously painted lots of his lily pads, and a traffic cone coming out of the water. I think that Banksy puts his middle finger up to the right people every time.
Yeah.
I think he's got a good eye for who he should be who he should be flipping a birdie at.
No, absolutely. And it's so interesting, like you said, like it's this sort of poking fun at what is considered an artwork, and the sort of people that can afford to buy these sorts of things. Because this was in an exhibition, I think it was around about 2005, where he essentially took some of the most iconic pieces within the history of art, sort of like Van Gogh's Sunflowers, for example, and essentially showed an empty vase, or he took Warhol's Marilyn Monroe and turned it into Kate Moss. But what I found really interesting about this exhibition, and something that I spoke with someone a few days ago, actually, I've got another podcast coming out about the use of animals in contemporary art. So it's really funny that you've mentioned the elephant that he painted and caused this uproar, because in this exhibition where he first showed Show Me the Money, he also placed 164 live rats in and amongst the exhibition, and in order to even get in, you had to be okay with being in this gallery space with all these rats running around. And in Sotheby's, where this painting sold, and I'll leave a link in the description, there's a really brilliant like news segment on it, and the presenter is like genuinely terrified being in this gallery with all these sort of sleeping rats around her. He loves a shock, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, for sure.
I think one of his biggest shocks, though, came in the form of Disneyland, which I am very jealous that you managed to get tickets to.
Yeah, I know. It was I think it's 2015, but I remember they were announcing that it was happening, but that there was something online where you couldn't get tickets until, like, tickets online were not being released until the Monday of that week or something, even though it opened on the Friday. And me and my parents said, well, actually, it's not that far a drive to get to Weston-super-Mare. Why don't we just like try our luck? Because people wouldn't have already got their tickets. I'm sure people would much rather have got a ticket and wait in line knowing they were going to get in. So we thought, well, we'll risk it. And we got there, and there, half an hour queue or something. But you hear stories of people after having got their tickets waiting for something like 8 or 9 hours to get in. So we really timed it well. It was brilliant. But no, it was properly formative. I think that'll stay on the highlights reel of my life, I'm sure.
So I only know one other person that managed to get tickets, and they drove from London with their dad at like 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, and she said that's the only reason that they managed to get tickets. But for people listening, what was Disneyland? What was Banksy's Disneyland?
Banksy basically took over an abandoned Lido in Weston-super-Mare, and he built, and his team obviously built, a sort of dilapidated version of Disneyland where there are a lot of sculptures of your Disney characters. So at the entrance there's Ariel from The Little Mermaid, but I think she's sort of cut up and there's oil around her and stuff like that. And one of the rooms inside this castle is a carriage crash with Cinderella having fallen out of her carriage, and the horses are on the floor, and there's flashing lights, and it's all like the journos are around to taking pictures for the morning press and stuff like that. So it's a dark twist on things. But there were other parts around the area of, I don't know, I'm trying to call it an arena. I'm not sure what to call it really, but around Disneyland. And there was a gallery with an exhibition of brilliant contemporary artists doing not things in a similar vein to Banksy necessarily, but doing things that had the same kind of impact as Banksy does, in terms of it's not commercial art that you'd put up in a hotel. It's saying something. And so there's an exhibition there, and there are attendants walking around like there would be at Disneyland, but they're absolutely fucking horrible. They're all miserable and shouting at you and obviously hate being there and are absolute dicks the whole time. And to add to part of this kind of performance element to the whole thing, and yeah, there are lots of sculptures, and I think that there were days where they had music and bands and things playing as well, but yeah, and it was perfect. The day that we went, it was also pissing down with rain and grey and horrible, and yeah,
It's really setting the scene.
yeah, exactly. And I know everyone thinks that you're basically a sellout as soon as you're selling t-shirts, but I did definitely buy a Dismaland t-shirt for sure.
Well, I was going to say, was there not? I was reading, there's a really great Guardian article actually. I mean, it's more of like a visual article than what it is sort of written. There's some really great images in it. But one of the things was that they show the gift shop and that he was selling like kits to break into bus shelter advertisement boards.
Yeah, so there were other people there, or like other stations around the place which had different charities and activist groups sort of manning stuff there. So there were lots of you could get stickers and Allen keys and stuff, like you say, for opening up bus adverts, and stuff about the violence within the Met and things like that. So that was actually really interesting. That I think Banksy does a good job at elevating proper issues, and Dismaland was no different. He really gave a space to other activists and other groups, which I thought was really good.
And he's really sort of he's really not shy to sort of poke fun at things, particularly in the British media and things that have caught headlines very recently. One of them, for example, is I don't know if it's Banksy himself that's done that or it's a different artist, but there was the whole scandal around horse meat in the British press at the time, and on the carousel that's there, because these rides you could go and sit on these rides, but on the carousel, one of these images that I found is someone in essentially like a butcher's outfit, and he's like hung up one of the carousel horses, and this was sort of poking fun at the time. I think it was Tesco and Asda in the UK, which for people that aren't listening from the UK, that's huge big supermarkets that we have here. And there was a scandal where they had found traces of horse meat in the frozen ready meal lasagnas. And it was this huge big scandal. More importantly, however, was this refugee boat. I don't know, was it one of these things where you put money in and you could essentially could you move the boats to try
Yeah,
and rescue
yeah. I
migrants? Was this
can't I
the
can't remember exactly whether you had the option to control it, but it was like a lot of things there were like you would get at a fairground, like a traditional UK fairground of hooker duck and things like that. But in this one, there was sort of a pond with remote control boats in, which had figurines of migrants in the boat and somewhere outside of the boat. And I can't remember whether you could drive them yourself, but this boat was certainly moving around. And it was an exhibition, if we're going to call it that, or an event, or a sort of movement. I'm not really sure what to call it, but that everything that was going on at the time really felt like it got encapsulated in what Dismaland was about, and everything was covered, like you say, the horse meat scandal, but then also sort of darker things. I'm sure that a lot of people would view the horse meat and the lasagna as pretty dark, but properly, proper hard stuff.
yeah, absolutely. He included some incredible works by very sort of well-known, sort of worldwide, international contemporary artists, Damien Hirst, Jenny Holzer, for example. I mean, how was it displayed? Did people know what they were looking at? Was it displayed like a gallery, or was it very much, I don't know, like
Yeah, it
just
was. It was sort of a separate building, away from the main kind of sculptures and things like that. And you went in, and it sort of was hung like a gallery, and it was, yeah, things were up on the wall. There were some sculptures. There was a sculpture of, I can't remember the artist now, but it's something that really impacted me. It was a car that was sort of in disrepair, but they'd done like huge thick embroidery into the car, which was really interesting. But again, it's hard to remember these things because 2015, I was 17. So
yeah,
I'm trying to remember what things were,
a lot going on.
What was actually happening. But that was really brilliant and very helpful to me doing my art A level at the time, and you have to do some analytical work about artists. So that was brilliant for me to just go and look at stuff and go, oh, cool, I haven't ever heard of them before. And, introduce me more to Jenny Holzer, like you say, introduce me more to these other artists that were brilliant. But it was a hugely impactful exhibition just like on its own.
Yeah.
And it's very surreal because obviously it's this huge thing that will kind of go down in art history. That I was there for a couple of hours with my parents on a rainy day.
Yeah, and it's in this sort of, seaside town, sort of south of Bristol in England. And I mean, it kind of very much, I mean, not to say anything bad about Weston-super-Mare, it's kind of one of these sort of seaside towns of the past
Yeah,
almost.
and it's where it's Banksy's neck of the woods as well.
Ah,
Yeah, this rundown Lido that gets taken up again, but it's a Weston-super-Mare and places like that, or anywhere you think in Bournemouth or English seaside towns are mostly grey and mostly they're not sandy beaches for relaxing. They're normally pretty tough. And
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
you always think of the sort of Victorian times as this sort of really,
Yeah, sort of their heyday has long since
yeah,
gone.
they've got the
Yeah.
glamour of it being a really big deal that they've got electric lights and things like that, and
Yeah.
and the illuminations and things. But English seaside towns are often have not been looked after properly in terms of funding and stuff like that. So they're often left as
Yeah.
they're brilliant places to do exhibitions, but I'm sure that the economies of these places would much rather have been looked after properly rather than getting a one-off hit of tourism from Banksy.
Yeah, I mean it's really funny because going back to the whole idea of Banksy, he's also very much an activist as well as an artist. He's very in tune and he uses his art to really sort of hit home and not just issues in the press, but also very important sort of social issues as well, such as migration and war, and even something like Disneyland, for example. So I know we're talking there a wee bit about the economy of Weston-super-Mare. So, for example, that what I read in an article was that 6 weeks that this exhibition was on for, it pumped something like 20 million into the local economy because people were staying in the hotels and eating at the restaurants and all sorts of things. So that in itself is incredible. But when everything was taken down, he then sent nothing was wasted, all the sort of things that were used to build the sort of interiors of Disneyland, for example, were all then sent to refugee
Yeah, a lot
camps.
of it went to Calais.
Yeah, to sort of help build shelters, and actually part of it also built a playground in Calais that I read. So like he's someone who, like you said, he knows who to stick the middle finger up to in the correct way, but also he's very aware of, sort of uses the privilege of where he is to help.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that does give Banksy such an appeal is that regardless of what you think of his work or his techniques, or regardless of what you think about street art in terms of, I guess, public property law or whatever, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, that you can't help but sort of give him a clap for why he's doing the things he's doing and where a lot of the money goes and where what is the driving force behind a lot of his projects. Stuff he's done on the borders of war-torn countries and things like that, I think are very admirable.
Yeah, well, that's it, because he famously set up a hotel, and was it Bethlehem or that he set up
It
a
was
hotel
in the Gaza
near the sort
Strip,
of
wasn't it? I'm not
Gaza
sure. I'm
Strip?
gonna look it up
Yeah,
now though.
was it called the Wardolph Hotel, something like that, as a play on the Wardolph?
Yeah, it was the walled off hotel.
The wall. Yeah.
With the famously called the worst view in the world for the hotel. But yeah, I think that he's got the right ammo.
Mm. And I think that kind of leads us quite nicely on to one of the other images that you've sent us. So I actually hadn't seen this one, the French embassy
Yeah.
that you had sent me. So, I mean, could you want to describe it for people
Yeah,
at
so
home?
basically Banksy, one of Banksy's poster works. So in street art, you can either use spray paint, some people use kind of stamps, but some people do posters or printouts that you paste up. And this is one of his paste up pieces, and it's sort of a pastiche of the little girl that you'll see in the original designs for Les Miserables. And she's crying, and there's a QR code, which I think is the important bit of this piece. So it's on the French embassy, and at the time there's a big scandal of violence being used within the French military. I think it was against protesters, but you must forgive me if that's incorrect. And the QR code took you straight to a video of these kind of atrocities happening against civilians and against refugees. And that was where I thought was really important. I think that was a particular move for Banksy towards digital work, or work that engaged with the digital, because at that point as well, QR codes were still quite an exciting thing that seemed pretty not like miraculous, but exactly,
revolutionary.
Like it was a way that work could go beyond what it was doing, so that's why I picked that work to send over to you, because I think that was one of the examples where, as an artist who started doing things in the early noughties, late 90s, he's kept up with the times. Like, he's not still talking about the same issues, but he's also not using the same materials either.
Yeah, and I also think, so what blew me away, like you said, is that QR code. And it's almost like it's letting people see the evidence for themselves, because, you can sort of spray paint something on a wall and people be like, oh yeah, sure, whatever, where's the evidence? But it's actively encouraging people to not only just educate themselves, but like see the proof and engage and potentially do something.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was a big thing for me in terms of, I guess that the things that are important to you have to be done across different things. It's hard to explain, but there's a difference between Banksy like you say, doing a piece about, isn't it really bad that the police mistreat people? And it's very different for him to say, isn't it bad that the police mistreat people? Look at them mistreating people. And I think that is something that, we all know the impact of social media and the news. And we've got access to everything that's happening around the world 24/7. And I think that Banksy caught up with that, like the impact of that, and having access to the things that were previously secret or whatever.
Well, that's it. And I also think he's so clever to use, because this was outside the French embassy in London that this appeared in 2016. And I just think it's really clever to use something as instantly recognizable as the Les Miserables, I don't know, sort of cover art that is known globally. And, you don't need any writing there. Like, it's just so, I don't know, it's just a part of everyone's culture. It's this huge cultural thing that it's such a white, not just a musical, but a movie and a really incredible book by Victor Hugo. You see this and you know what it is, so it kind of also breaks down that thing where you might not feel like you understand what it's about. It's something to do with French culture and poverty and
I think that's
rebellion.
Something that Banksy does excellently, though, is accessibility to his works, and even works that aren't out on the street for people to see. He is never using visual cues that you need to have got a degree in art history to know what it's about. Like, art is full of people referencing an artist who came before them, who's referencing an artist who came before them, and if you don't understand the reference of whatever, then you don't get it. And that kind of snobbery within art. Whereas everything that Banksy does, we know that that's a Monet, but he's chosen Monet, and like you say, he chose Van Gogh, and he chooses these big hitters because that is a reference that we get. And he's chosen the little girl from Les Miserables, and he's chosen he's chosen Disney, and he's chosen the idea of the elephant in the room, and Guantanamo Bay when he did a blow up doll in Disneyland Florida. And he chooses these references that people get. I think that's the thing of every artist I've ever spoken to anyone about. Banksy might be the only person that someone hasn't said, I just don't get it. Like, we get it.
Yeah, and that's and that's so important. And it's that, I wonder if perhaps that's part of his success as well as sort of poking fun at things. And he does it at a sort of not a ground level way, but on an equal playing field is a better way to say it. It's an equal playing field for everyone to understand. You don't have to have your, you know, top education from the best university going. You know, you could be from a council estate and you can still understand what these images are and what
I
they
think
can
that's the
do.
thing is that Banksy isn't making art for the kind of people who buy his art. And I think he knows that. Like, he's not making art for the kind of people who buy a piece of art for £7.5 million. He's making art that mocks those people. He's making art that is for everyone and is for, you know, I think that street art is a brilliant medium because I think that it's really important that there are ways to access art that aren't going into the gallery space. Because I think that people say, well, you know, the gallery's free, so it's accessible. So, well, that's not really what that means. You know, if the gallery remains a space that we all associate with white walls and white artists and language we don't understand,
very deep topics,
language we don't understand, and references we don't understand, then even if it's free, why would I want to go in there? And that's why I think that street art and Banksy having stuff online and referencing people we know and things we know is the importance of that, I don't think, can be understated.
Well, that's it. And even something like Dismaland, it was only something like £2 or £3 to get in there, which I think's amazing. And all that money went into sort of other projects. But something as important as, you know, like you said, street art is such a great way to engage with the many from this sort of something that you and I both champion, sort of breaking down the elitism within art history, but also within galleries as well, because you can say to someone till you're blue in the face, but these big, you know, these big gallery spaces are free, but they're also in incredibly intimidating buildings that sometimes you have to even buzz to get into. And that's really intimidating when you already don't feel like you tick all the boxes of people in a space that you feel like you don't belong. And whereas Banksy doing this and sort of bringing it to the people is a really great, you know, way to hit it home that you are completely part of this narrative just as much as everyone else is.
Yeah, completely. And sort of my two big art heroes, I guess, when I was a teenager, and now probably if you were to ask me who my two favourite artists are, it'd be Banksy and Hirst. And I think that Hirst has more conceptual stuff going on in terms of, you know, people don't get what Hirst is doing. And that's not a complaint that Banksy gets. But I found it so refreshing that both of them do stuff that's like against the tradition of, I've done 100 lovely paintings and they're all going to be hung up in this white wall gallery and that's where that ends. You know, I think that both of them have interesting dialogues about sort of the anarchicness of them is something that really appealed to me and continues to do so.
What I also think is really important to remind people that are listening that in the UK, graffiti is illegal. If you are caught graffitiing, it is you can be criminally prosecuted. You can spend time in prison. You're also fined, and I think that's also another thing that's great about Banksy is his complete defiance of everything. Although I don't know if he's ever been caught by a police officer. I mean, has that ever been sort of recorded anywhere that he's been caught?
I mean, I reckon that he will have been early days, you know, before he was Banksy. I remember when I was going on this street art tour in Shoreditch, and we went through all the things, and Shoreditch is now famous for its, you know, Brick Lane and all of the street art that is in East London, and that's sort of its big thing now. But I remember going on this tour and seeing all this amazing art that I thought, like, isn't this bloody brilliant that this is, you can just see this on your walk. But I remember we got to the end, we got to a bar, sort of outside bar, where there was some original Banksys which were covered in bulletproof glass, which there's plenty of places where Banksys, like original Banksys, have been found and covered up with perspex so that they're not defaced. And it's really interesting that that's sort of come about. There's a really beautiful piece of street art at the end of my road. They're really quite elegant outline drawing, and I used to love it. And then a couple of weeks ago, someone's done another thing next to it, which I don't like, and I feel outraged. But then I'm like, well, that's the point, isn't it? Like,
it's for everyone. Yeah,
I can't be annoyed this bit of graffiti has been covered up with another bit of graffiti, given that that's the nature of the art form, right? Like, and that goes back to the original street art being done in Harlem and in Brooklyn of of it being a territorial thing of, you know, you'd write your name on something and someone would write over it, and there's a kind of gang warfare. But Banksies are often protected or prized off walls. There was a guy who saw a Banksy in Brighton, I think, and he prized the bit of wall out of this wall, and he went onto Antiques Roadshow last year with this piece of artwork, and basically got a telling off because Banksy has this website called Pest Control, and that's the only website where you can get a piece of Banksy's artwork authorized. Like if you think you've got a Banksy, you go through this website, and that's where you get a certificate of authenticity. And if you haven't got that, then it's basically worthless. And Banksy often denounces works that are his, but people have prized off public walls because he think that's obviously a terrible thing to do. So he often says that, no, that wasn't me in the first place. But yeah, this guy came on with a piece of artwork that he'd stolen from the public, basically, and got a wrist slap on television and looked like an absolute mug. But yeah, because he hadn't got this certificate, and had obviously just, you know, he deprived people of public artwork, which is hang him, I say.
I think it's just classic opportunists saw, perhaps saw a way to make a quick buck or have a good story. But yeah, and it happens constantly, but it's always this thing where whenever a new Banksy is unveiled or discovered, rather, should we say, it makes news headlines all over the world. It's this really exciting thing that happens. But really funny that you mentioned the whole idea of him sort of denouncing artworks, because there was one that you sent me and we mentioned very briefly this whole idea around who is Banksy. Nobody knows. There's certain theories, and the most recent one, I actually thought this happened in like 2019, and that just shows you how long 2020 actually was, that this only happened 3 months ago. And I was like, I thought this was years ago this happened. And it's the whole idea that he this theory that essentially like imploded on the internet, that he was this children's TV presenter called Neil Buchanan.
Banksy is Neil Buchanan, and I won't hear any otherwise. I won't hear anything different.
Oh, right. So for our non-UK listeners who, or even our listeners that perhaps weren't born sort of 90s, early noughties, Neil Buchanan is this iconic. He deserves a knighthood, in my opinion. He is amazing. He is a children's TV presenter, and he used to do this amazing program. One of his amazing programs was called Art Attack, and essentially he used to make all this incredible art. And he had this. Do you remember the talking head?
Freaky.
This sort of marble talking head, but it was a puppet. Yeah, so you sent me this, and do you want to just explain what it is on the side of a wall?
This is in Northampton, which is my my hometown, and this appeared during the week where it was kind of top Twitter news or whatever, that people were saying that Neil Buchanan is Banksy, and it's on a wall, and it's basically a picture of Neil Buchanan holding up the decapitated head of one of Banksy's sort of signature monkeys, and it says "Art Attack?" over the top of it, and it's on the side of someone's shed, basically. and yeah, it's not been certified as a Banksy. It says Banksy at the bottom of it, but either way, I think it's brilliant. But people absolutely love it when Banksy goes to their town. Like, it's a huge honor to let him come and ruin your shed.
Well, that's it. I mean, I remember, this might have been 2020 as well. My whole sort of, timeline has been skewed. I think it might have been 2018, 2019, where he was on the side of a shed in Wales somewhere. It was like it was a wee one, and there was a dumpster fire, like a big trash can fire, and he was sort of like eating the ashes from it as if it was snowing. Was either 2018, 2000, maybe probably could have been last week, for all I know. My timeline is
for sure
gone. But what's really interesting, like you said, is that the gentleman whose garage this appeared on, when he went on to Pest Control, Banksy's site that sort of authenticates his works, and they said it wasn't a Banksy.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking news for the people of Northampton. But I think that also the fact that now this artwork exists is a good thing, or I like the fact that people are pastiching Banksy to the extent where, like, this is a well thought through piece, right? Like, the person has thought, what are the telltale signs of a Banksy? They've got his old signature they used to use as a stencil, and this monkey, and it's all stylistically it could be a Banksy. If it turned out to be a Banksy, you wouldn't be surprised at all. And I quite like the fact that someone's thought that through that much and has made a piece of art that I think is very, very valuable, conceptually, and I think it's great. And street art, perhaps more than any art, reacts really quickly to current affairs and to what's important to people at the time. I mean, conceptual artists, contemporary artists do react to things, but potentially in a more abstract way, and it'll take them a couple of years to get together all the paintings for the exhibition they're making about this issue, whereas street art goes straight out and says it.
Well, that's it, and that's why it's so important. But it also kind of toes the line between this permanent and yet can be taken away at any moment. There's nothing to say that the guy that owns this, this brick wall is like, well, it's not a Banksy, let's get the paint out. Do you know what I mean? And then it could be gone forever. I mean, I think he would be an absolute fool to do that, and I don't think he has. But you're right, it's so important, and it's even if it isn't a Banksy like they say it is, it's a homage and a really great way of showing how important, like you said, street art is and how quick it reacts to things. And it's a really great sort of snapshot of a moment in time, also when the world was falling apart. But I was really enjoying sort of reading about this, and Neil Buchanan had to come out and say like his website had crashed because he had so many people like emailing the website to be like, are you Banksy?
I just really want Neil Buchanan to be Banksy. I feel like for a lot of people, Banksy's Neil Buchanan thing was a week in 2020, whereas now I feel like that's my life cause. To prove.
That's oh my gosh, are you going to you'll write the book on how you sort of step by step worked it out. But I'm loving these like conspiracy sort of fan theory things about, because he was in a band, and whenever his band has played at this place, a few weeks later a Banksy magically appears. It's just so good.
And the thing is that there are people who know who Banksy is, and
of course.
I think that's brilliant that people still don't know, and that there will be something lost when people do know who Banksy is. Like, his career is built around this anonymity, and I think that once there is a face to the name, that will sort of be the end. And I said before, how can he go bigger with these pranks? After shredding that piece at Christie's, where does it end? And I think the thing is with Banksy is that it only ends when we know who he is.
Well, that's it. When he firmly sort of retires and has the big reveal essentially. And I wonder, if he will ever do that. I mean, artists don't ever really retire, but yeah, it would be a day in the history books if he does eventually reveal who he is. Of course, again, there's also, if you Google, like I did, researching for this podcast, do we know who Banksy is? There is a name sort of floating about out there that they think it's this person. And when you Google Banksy, for example, and you always have that sort of quick snapshot of, where they were born, their dates, where they were active, where they trained, how many kids they have, and then if they have a wife or a spouse, and they're apparently, they seem to think this woman is married to Banksy. So it's really interesting that they seem to think that it's this essentially old, like, used to be like a painter and decorator or something like that. I don't know, but even if you did think it was, even if it wasn't you and you were pinned on it, like it's hilarious even just to go along with it, just to be like, oh yeah, sure, I'm Banksy, whatever. It's just so interesting that he's created this.
Exactly. I remember when I was doing this street art tour, there was a piece of work someone had done, like a massive wall piece, and at the bottom there was a tally chart, had like 7 or 8 tallies in it, and the guy doing the tour told us that a lot of the time artists will do a tally chart for every time that they're asked if they're Banksy while they're doing the piece. So people make a tally of like 7 times while I was making this piece, people asked me if I was Banksy, and I think that's funny. I don't know whether it's true or not, but I think it's funny.
Oh, I love that. But I also love that people get really excited and want to come up and like interact with the artist as well while they're making, just to like be the person that's like, I know who Banksy is.
Or yeah, exactly. Or like if someone saw Banksy doing something, they said, are you Banksy? Would Banksy say, yeah, I'm Banksy? Probably not.
Well, that's just be like, nah, just a big fan though. So I think moving on to one of the last work that you sent me, I mean, I mean, is it a work in itself? Who knows? We spoke earlier about, could he really sort of outdo Dismaland, and, how does he go sort of bigger and better from here? But in 2020, I think he's completely outdid himself. And do you want to explain to people what this last project that he's been working on and is currently going?
The Louise Michel is a boat that is funded, I'm not sure fully or partially, by Banksy at least, which has a mission to basically, it's a rescue boat for migrants trapped at sea in the Mediterranean. And Louise Michel was a really important member of the Paris Commune, a famous anarchist. And this rescue boat has saved hundreds of lives. And on the boat, it's got a couple of Banksy pieces spray painted onto the side. And I think that's an example of, I guess, Banksy doing good with his work, but also, I don't know, I think that if he'd put more of his work on it, it could have looked like a stunt. There's a couple of pieces.
Yeah.
His little girl, who normally holds the red balloon, is holding a life support ring. You throw it into the water, I'm not sure what they're called, but holding one of those, which is in the shape of a heart. And it's and I think that he's added these touches to it, but I don't think that he's not capitalizing on the issue. I think that it's a really nice thing that he's done.
Like you said, partly or in all funded this boat, and it was after the attention of this German scientist came to his attention, and essentially the boat that she was using to pick up migrants in the Mediterranean had been essentially impounded, and she was facing an incredibly huge fine by the Italian authorities, because essentially migrants try to come in through sort of Malta and Italy. That's what's considered the gateway into Europe. And so Banksy read about this, and because she started this essentially because not all distress calls are answered, some are just left to essentially die on the water. And there's a sort of merchant's code that she's trying to, not a merchant's, a sort of navy code that she's trying to uphold. And essentially Banksy read about this and sort of reached out and said, can I help by sort of funding a new boat? And she actually thought, because the email was so casual, and he literally just said in the email, "Oh, I'm an artist from Britain and I've done a few things to raise some money. Can I send you this money to buy a new boat?" And she thought it was so casual. She thought it was a joke to begin with. But they didn't advertise it. It was very all hush hush.
Yeah.
Until it had launched, because essentially they were worried it would attract too much attention. And the boat has its own website, which is really interesting. And hold on, there's a really nice quote. This is where I can't find the tab. Here we go, I've got it. So it says, "Our mission: to uphold maritime law and rescue anyone in peril without prejudice. We on board the Louise Michel believe we are all individuals. Nationality should not make a difference to what rights one has and how we treat each other. We answer the SOS call of all those in distress, not just to save their souls, but to save our own." And it's a really incredible, powerful thing. On their first mission, they had issues, and essentially they took on too many migrants that had sent out distress calls, and essentially the ship had to then get help because they had too many people on board that it couldn't move, essentially. What I really like about this is that, like you said, it's not this big publicity stunt. It was done very much under the radar, and there's references to Banksy, but he's very much just sort of like, here's how I can help.
Exactly. And we know that Banksy has a good track record of defending things and people who need defending. Like, having something gifted by Banksy as part of this as this rescue mission doesn't feel tasteless, whereas there are other artists, I feel like if they donated a whole load of money, you'd sort of feel a bit dirty from it, I think it's brilliant. And I think that from the get-go, even if it's not been for a direct activist cause, he's talking about the things that need to be spoken about, in a way that means that everyone can engage in the conversation, because the way that politicians speak and the way that art galleries speak and the way that policymakers speak is not the language of the people, you know.
Well, that's it, and it's it's about what is important. It's people helping others in need, and I think Banksy, like you said, that's really at the core of what he tries to do. He tries to raise the attention of things that perhaps have gone under the radar or are you know they're not pushed or seen as a priority in the modern day press, because why would we talk about a migrant crisis when it's hilarious to poke fun at how ridiculous Boris Johnson is, like things that are so completely out of whack in the UK. And I think this was a really great thing to include, so thank you so much, because I would not have thought of including this as a work almost from Banksy, or as a talking point, but I think that also reflects purely on what's also on my radar as well, or what I consider. But it's so I think it's a really, really important, and anyone listening that hasn't heard of this, I'll leave a link to the boat's website, and also a really great article about how it came about. But it's also currently blocked from leaving port.
It's in a bit of it's a complicated situation with anything like this, and that's the problem, isn't it? Of it's often much harder legislatively to do good things than it is to do bad things. It's a lot easier to get away with not paying tax than it is to save lives on at sea. But there we go.
Yeah, which is a very, very grim note indeed. But it's a really, really important thing that he's done here, and that he continues to do. And I can only imagine he continued to make headlines throughout 2020 though, and he did, like you said, bar the Neil Buchanan thing. Out with that, he also did a lot of graffiti in his house. I remember, like, he posted on his Instagram page about, my wife
that was
hates
great. The rats, all of the rats in his bathroom, and he did a massive piece in a London tube train about early days of the pandemic, about wearing a mask, and he basically, him and I think one other person from his team, dressed as cleaners for, also heavy duty cleaners for these tube trains, and did this piece and then left. But the London Transport folk got rid of it because they assumed it was just normal graffiti, But I bet they wished that they'd covered that in Perspex as well,
Oh, I know. Can you imagine? Or even, like, that would have been such a brilliant piece to, like, have in, like, the Museum of Transport, for example.
Yeah,
like,
I think they'd have
draw people
cut
in
that train up for sure.
Definitely. But I read with that that it was because of their strict no. Oh my God, what was it? Yes, their strict no vandalism policy, or no graffiti policy, and that's why they got rid of it, which I think is absolutely bonkers. They must have been kicking themselves when they realised.
Strict policies are fine when they work for everyone, I guess. The thing is that if you saw Banksy or someone who you thought might be Banksy doing an artwork on the side of a train tunnel or whatever, you'd probably leave them to it. But imagine if that same person was like a young black bloke, they'd have the cops called on them, and they'd be more likely to be fined and things like that. So it's really interesting. Banksy has a case study of what we find acceptable when white blokes do it. We view the graffiti and tagging done on trains in Harlem as vandalism, but we view Banksy's works as works of art, and we view works done by other sort of famous street artists. I don't think you'd call people who do graffiti as tagging. So tagging is just writing your name or writing your tag or or whatever as vandalism, but suddenly it becomes art when the right kind of person is doing it.
Well, that's it. And when a name or a brand, if you will, the brand of Banksy, it's so interesting. I think that's a completely different podcast episode in itself. Sort of the morality around how one type of person can do something and it's seen as acceptable, and yet so many others can do it and it's not. And I think we've seen that particularly with recently happened, with the
Yeah.
Capitol in America, with Black Lives Matter, the protest there, and then the Trump supporters storming the Capitol. It's just been, I thought 2020 was supposed to be a little bit better, people. It's been so eventful. But Verity, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about Banksy. Like, I have really enjoyed like researching for this podcast and chatting to you. It's been so brilliant, and I'm so jealous that you actually got to Dismaland. One of my big regrets, and doesn't matter how far away you are, just do it. You might as well regret doing it than not doing it, sort of thing. So this is the Joe's Art History podcast. I do have one sort of final question for you, and you can take this as large or as sort of small and relevant to you as possible. And it's quite a big question. So my final one is, why is art important?
My take is that art is important because of the way that it can impact people's lives. It can inform us about different ways of thinking, different ways of seeing, etc. But I think that art will never be as important as it can be or as impactful as it can be until it is accessible for everyone. That's my take.
No, and I think that's a really important thing to think about, like how it informs you and makes you think. And even, Banksy's a great example of that. He's someone who uses the power of art to inform and raise awareness. And yeah, that's a really brilliant response. So thank you so much. And a lot of food for thought there.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Before you go, where can people find you and what you're up to?
The best place to follow me is on Instagram, which is at Verity Babs Art. And on there, I link to all the other places you can hear from me. I've got a website, which is www.veritybabs.com. And main thing I want to plug is I have a series called Art Laughs on YouTube, where I interview comedians about a piece of art that they like or don't like, as the case may be.
Amazing. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to me. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and I'm really excited to see, your
Thanks
writing
so much,
and everything in the future.
And there you have it, another episode of the Joe's Art History podcast. Once again, thank you so much to Verity for coming on and speaking so brilliantly about Banksy and really bringing to light 5 incredible works from this really prolific and important contemporary artist. Also, if you yourself would like to join Verity on her quest to prove that Neil Buchanan is in fact Banksy, do get in touch and let her know. The links to her social channels and her website are in the show notes below. And I think the more people that can help prove this, the better, really. I feel that the world would be a better place if this was the case. If you've enjoyed the episode, please make sure to like, rate and subscribe. And if you're able to, please can I ask if you can leave a review? It really helps other people find the podcast. And we're moving very slowly up the charts, which means the world to me, and it's very exciting to see the listens grow week on week. And it's lovely to have you all here. And if you know anybody that you think, would really enjoy listening to it, then let them know, and please do pass on the podcast. As always, if you would like to get in touch, you can email me, joesarthistory@gmail.com, or you can contact me via Instagram at joesarthistory. My DMs are always open, and the links to both of those things are, as always, in the show notes below. This episode of the Joe's Art History podcast is also now available to view on YouTube. So as you listen along to Verity and I talk, you can also see the images that we are talking about, just if you're a bit more of a visual person, and this will help you really get a feel for what we're talking about. If that doesn't light a fire under you, not a problem. You can view the images via my Instagram page at Joe's Art History, or you can find them on my website, as always, at www.joesarthistory.com. Finally, I have been Jo McLaughlin, your host and resident art historian, and thank you so much for listening to the Joe's Art History podcast. I hope you've learned a little something. I know I definitely have, and I look forward to welcoming you next time on the Joe's Art History podcast. Until then, keep learning, and remember, art is for all. Bye.